Imagine a sport so popular that 250,000 people showed up to watch it live. Not once a year for a championship final, but multiple times a week for centuries. A sport where the top athlete earned the equivalent of $15 billion, where team owners wielded more political power than senators, and where fans literally burned down half a city over a bad call. This was chariot racing in ancient Rome. And if you think modern sports are big business, you have no idea. The Roman chariot racing industry made the NFL, Premier League, and Formula One look like lemonade stands. It was the single largest entertainment economy the ancient world ever produced. And today we're going to run the numbers on what it actually cost to own a chariot racing team. The heart of it all was the Circus Maximus, 600 meters long, 150 meters wide, the largest entertainment venue ever built in the ancient world, and it wouldn't be surpassed for nearly 2,000 years. At its peak, it seated somewhere between 150,000 and 250,000 spectators. For context, the largest NFL stadium today holds about 80,000. The Circus Maximus was roughly 3 of those, stacked together. And it was packed, race day after race day, year after year. In the early Republic, Rome had maybe 17 official circus days per year. But by the 4th century, that number had exploded to 66 dedicated racing days, with up to 24 races crammed into a single day of competition. That means at peak, Rome was hosting over 1,500 chariot races every single year, in one city alone. And the whole empire was watching, because every major city had its own hippodrome. Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, Carthage, all running their own racing calendars. This was not a niche hobby, it was the Roman entertainment industrial complex. Now here is where it gets interesting from a business perspective. Chariot racing was not run by individual owners like modern horse racing. It was run by 4 massive corporate factions, each identified by a colour: the reds, the whites, the blues, and the greens. Think of them less like sports teams and more like Formula One constructors. Each faction was a fully integrated racing operation. They owned the horses, employed the drivers, built the chariots, and ran the training facilities. A faction had stables, veterinarians, blacksmiths, wheelwrights, grooms, and mounted pace riders called hortatores. They even had sparsaws, crew members whose only job was throwing water on the horses mid-race. Each faction maintained operations not just in Rome, but in cities across the entire empire. They were multinational corporations, 2,000 years before that concept was supposed to exist. The head of each faction was the Dominus Factionis, essentially a CEO, backed by wealthy patrons. Senators, aristocrats, and often the emperor himself funded operations through a mix of private wealth and race winnings. By the mid-2nd century, the 4 factions had consolidated into 2 supergroups. The blues absorbed the reds, the greens swallowed the whites. Sound familiar? It should. It is basically the same merger logic as any modern sports league. Reduce competition, concentrate talent, maximize revenue. Now let's talk about the most expensive line item on a faction's budget: the horses. Pliny the Elder himself said racehorses were the single most profitable livestock to breed, which tells you 2 things. Horses were expensive, and the margins were enormous if you bred winners. Factions sourced horses from the finest bloodlines across the empire: North Africa, Spain, Cappadocia in modern Turkey, Sicily, Thessaly in Greece. They tracked pedigrees obsessively, with stud ancestry valued above all else. A top racing horse could sell for staggering sums, tens of thousands of sesterces. For perspective, a Roman legionary earned about 900 sesterces a year, so one elite horse could cost what a soldier earned in an entire career. Training started when horses were just 3 years old. They didn't race until age 5, meaning 2 full years of investment before a single return. And a horse's racing career could stretch until age 20, if it survived. Each race required a team of 4 horses, and a faction might field 3 teams per race. With up to 24 races a day, you needed somewhere between 700 and 800 horses available. Just for one day, at one track, in one city. The left lead horse, called the introjugus, was the most critical and the most expensive. This horse had to navigate the tight inside turns at full gallop without flipping the chariot. Finding one that could do that reliably was like finding a starting quarterback, rare and wildly expensive. Factions ran massive breeding programs to produce these animals at scale. It was agricultural industry and elite sport fused into one operation. Now let's talk about the men who actually risked their lives in these chariots. Most charioteers started as slaves, purchased as boys and trained by the factions. They began as origai, junior drivers handling 2-horse chariots. The best graduated to agitator status, commanding the prestigious 4-horse quadriga. A charioteer wrapped the reins around his waist and carried a knife to cut himself free in a crash. Because crashes happened constantly, and they were almost always fatal. The Romans even had a word for it, naufragium, meaning shipwreck. Scorpus, one of the greatest charioteers who ever lived, won over 2,000 races. He was dead by 27, almost certainly killed on the track. Fuscus, another champion, won 53 races in Rome and died at 24, still a slave. This was the brutal math of the business. Most of your talent inventory died young. But the ones who survived, they became the highest paid athletes in human history. Gaius Apuleius Diocles is the name you need to know. Born in Lusitania, modern Portugal, he started racing at 18 for the Whites. He switched to the Greens for 3 years, then spent his final 15 years with the Reds. Over a 24-year career, he raced 4,257 times. He won 1,462 of those races. And his total career prize money came to 35,863,120 sesterces. Professor Peter Struck calculated that some could feed the entire city of Rome for a year, or fund the Roman army for 2 months. In modern terms, that translates to roughly $15 billion, making Diocles the highest paid athlete in all of recorded history. For comparison, Lionel Messi's total career earnings sit around $1.5 billion. Diocles earned 10 times that, racing a wooden cart pulled by horses. But here is the catch. Diocles was the extreme outlier. Most charioteers earned far less, and many earned nothing at all because they were property. The prize money mostly went to the faction owners, not the drivers themselves. The economics fundamentally favoured the house, not the talent. Sound familiar? Now let's zoom out to race day and follow the money through the entire system. A typical race was 7 laps around the Spina, covering about 5 kilometres total. 24 races a day meant the Circus Maximus was essentially running 12 hours straight. Prize purses varied wildly, but the big races offered 30, 40, even 60,000 sesterces. Diocles won the 60,000 sesterce purse 3 times, and the 50,000 purse 29 times. Magistrates and politicians sponsored race days, and they were expected to pay for everything. This created a brutal economic filter. Only the ultra-wealthy could hold certain political offices, because sponsoring a full day of races could bankrupt a merely rich man. And then there was the betting economy, which was absolutely massive. Gambling on chariot races was legal in Rome, one of the very few forms of permitted betting. Professional bookmakers called sponsors worked the crowds setting odds and taking bets. But most betting was informal, fans simply turning to the person next to them and making a wager. 250,000 people, packed into a stadium, all betting on every race. The amount of money changing hands on a single afternoon was staggering. Fans didn't just bet with money, they bet with supernatural intervention. Archaeologists have found hundreds of lead curse tablets buried near racetracks across the empire. These Defixiones called on underworld gods to cripple rival horses and blind opposing drivers. People paid professional curse writers to craft these tablets, creating its own cottage industry. When you are commissioning black magic to win a bet, you know the stakes are high. But the factions were about far more than sports and gambling. They were political machines, the most powerful grassroots organizations in the Roman world. In Constantinople especially, the Blues and Greens functioned almost like political parties. They organized neighborhoods, influenced elections, and served as a voice for ordinary citizens. The Hippodrome was the one place where common people could shout directly at the emperor. And when the emperor didn't listen, things got ugly fast. In January 532, tensions between the Blues and Greens reached a breaking point in Constantinople. 2 convicted criminals, one from each faction, survived their executions when the scaffolding collapsed. When Emperor Justinian refused to pardon them, something unprecedented happened. The 2 rival factions united, chanting the word Nika meaning victory. What followed was 5 days of the most destructive urban riot in ancient history. The mobs burned nearly half of Constantinople to the ground, including the original Hagia Sophia. It took generals Belisarius and Mundus storming the hippodrome with soldiers to end it. According to the historian Procopius, 30,000 people were killed in the suppression, all because of chariot racing factions. Let that sink in. No modern sports rivalry has ever come close to that level of destruction. These factions were not just teams, they were identity, community, and political power wrapped in team colours. So what did it actually cost to run one of these faction enterprises? We don't have a complete ancient balance sheet, but we can reconstruct the math. Hundreds of horses to buy, breed, feed, train, and replace every single year. Dozens of charioteers to purchase, train, and compensate, knowing most would die. Veterinarians, trainers, blacksmiths, grooms, equipment builders, and administrative staff across multiple cities. Prize money flowing in was substantial, but so were the operating costs. The faction that produced Diocles paid out 35 million sesterces in prizes to one driver alone. They earned far more from the collective winnings across all their drivers and all those race days. Add sponsorship from emperors and senators who wanted political association with a winning team. Add the informal economy of tips, gifts, and rewards from wealthy fans. A top faction was generating revenue equivalent to hundreds of millions in modern currency every year. It was, by any measure, one of the largest private enterprises in the ancient world. The last race at the Circus Maximus ran in 549 AD, over 1,000 years after the first. Today it is a public park in Rome, the track buried 6 meters underground. But the business model never went away. Team-based competition funded by wealthy owners, fueled by gambling and fan loyalty, powered by sponsorship. That is the NFL, the Premier League, and Formula One. The Romans didn't just invent chariot racing, they invented the modern sports economy. Every time a billionaire buys a football club to boost his profile, he is doing what Roman senators did. Every time a driver switches teams for a bigger contract, that is Diocles leaving the whites for the greens. Every time fans riot after a match, well, at least they haven't burned down half a capital city. Yet.